In November 1844, a curious letter made its way to Samuel Joseph May of Leicester, Massachusetts. A former graduate of Harvard Divinity School, May was a Unitarian minister, a pacifist who opposed the death penalty, and one of the most radical American social reformers of his time. He was also a leader of the campaign against slave trade and a close friend of William Lloyd Garrison, who he helped in founding the American Anti-Slavery Society. On that late autumn day, May was to discover that the letter was accompanied by 12 little packets, each containing a portion of hair, 6 of them locks, removed from the head of a man who had died 11 years before. The sender of this curious transatlantic package, John Bishop Estlin of Bristol, believed that these rolls of hair could be sold to enthusiastic buyers to raise money for the abolitionist cause at the anti-slavery fairs held in America in the 1840s. A Unitarian and an illustrious surgeon, Estlin was one of Bristol's leading citizens. His enthusiasm for the carefully preserved locks of hair in his wonderful box was only matched by his admiration of the man from whose head he had once removed them, Raja Ram Mohan Rai. In England, the hair relics would be much prized, Estlin said, but he wasn't sure about their worth in America. Samuel May replied that across the Atlantic they were just as valuable.
The little packets of the hair of Rammohun Roy, I cannot doubt, will find ready purchasers. Some there are, I know, and doubtless many whom I do not know, who would rejoice to possess one of these undoubted relics of a most extraordinary man.
By the mid-18th century, Bristol was England's second largest city after London, fueled by glass, shipbuilding, and other industries, and by maritime trade in sugar, tobacco, brass, and iron across Africa and the West Indies. Trading in slaves from the African continent provided the currency of many of these transactions. The apologists for slavery held that the practice had divine sanction, and some even argued that it was a natural state for inferior beings. The abolitionists argued that it was an unchristian practice, and adduced scientific evidence to build the case for human equality. It was Ram Mohan's social activism, in particular his opposition to the practice of widow burning, or sati in India, which first attracted the attention of abolitionists in Britain. They viewed the ban on sati as one of the early successes in their long battle against human servitude. John Bishop Estlin, the sender of our curious letter, was one of these admirers.
John Bishop Estlin was an early ophthalmic surgeon here in Bristol. He was a doctor, obviously. He was a surgeon, just as obviously, acting as the Raja's chief doctor.
Estlin was a close associate of the famous Bristol physician Thomas Beddoes, who was active in the anti-slavery movement as well. Among Ram Mohan's friends in England, Estlin wasn't the only abolitionist stalwart. Land Carpenter, who succeeded Estlin's father as minister at Lewensmead Chapel, was one of Ram Mohan's closest friends and a leader in the abolitionist cause. His daughter Mary, who edited an account of Ram Mohan's final years in England, went on to become a prominent abolitionist campaigner herself.
You were asking me about the Carpenter's relationship with the abolition movement in America. It wasn't just Land and his daughter Mary's connection. Land Carpenter started this movement in Bristol, and John Bishop had a single child, a daughter, Mary Ann. And she was very important indeed in collecting the gifts that were sent over to America. Mary Carpenter called it the box, And it wasn't just one box, they were probably wooden cases built by a local carpenter, I'm sure, and they were filled, completely filled, with gifts that had been made from people originally just in the West Country, but right across the country. And they were gifts that were sent across to Boston to be sold at the Boston Annual Abolition Fair. It must have been fascinating.
It was at Carpenter's behest that Ram Mohan came to live in the home of Miss Kittle and Miss Castle at Stapleton Grove in Bristol. It was here that he had fever 2 weeks later. The fever worsened, and nothing Estlin could do would bring it down. In Ram Mohan's final days, Estlin was accompanied on his fateful vigil at his friend's bedside by Ram Mohan's adopted son, Raja Ram Rai, and his servants, the nurse, Miss Hare, the carpenters, and his brother-in-law, the abolitionist James Cowles Pritchard. They had studied medicine together in Edinburgh. James Cowles Pritchard was a remarkable man. He was one of the first to advance the theory of evolution and the theory of the unity of the human species, known as monogenism. He was a contemporary and an intellectual rival of Charles Darwin's father, Dr. Robert Darwin, and his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, who was a naturalist and an abolitionist himself. It was Pritchard who proposed for the first time that the point of origin of the modern human was in Africa, a statement which was later removed, but remained politically significant in the context of the preeminence of the slave trade economy. It was these arguments, both theological and scientific, which built the case against slave trade. The very presence of the much admired Ram Mohan Roy strengthened the argument for its abolition. As Ram Mohan's health worsened in his final 3 weeks in Bristol, Pritchard was among those who stayed by his bedside the evening before his death. Ram Mohan died at 2:25 a.m. on the 27th of September 1833. Arrangements were made to have a death mask of his head taken before, the following day, Estlin conducted a post-mortem examination.
John Bishop knew his way round Bristol, and he called in a Welshman called Pugh, who was actually a monumental mason. He worked in marble. And Pugh knew an Italian plaster man who did ceilings and roses for ceilings and lightings and things. So he brought him in, and that is how the mask, the death mask of the Raja was made. It was made the very morning that the Raja died.
From Estlin's records, it has now been possible to conclude that Ram Mohan died of meningitis. The hair, the post-mortem, and the mask were their final effort to preserve the memory of a remarkable man who had left a deep impression on them. William Pugh was one of the foremost marble masons in Bristol, with an office in the city centre. Some of his later work can still be seen at St. Stephen's Parish Church in Bristol. Estlin sent the mask to the Phrenological Society in Edinburgh, which had close links with the Edinburgh Medical School, to which he was deeply attached. It was there that he had been allowed to study for a degree in medicine, because his Unitarian faith prevented him from studying in England for membership to the Royal College of Physicians. Edinburgh stood for the triumph of rationalism and the spirit of scientific inquiry over religious barriers, values Ram Mohan held close to his heart. This was soon followed by a phrenological analysis of the mask. In recent years, a second mask has surfaced in the collections.
It was this summer that we came to know that a second death mask of Ram Mohan Roy has been discovered in Edinburgh, in the office of Professor Matthew Kaufman. Professor Kaufman was the former chairman of the William Ramsay Henderson Trust, and he died in August 2013. And it was only after his death that the second mask was discovered in his office. Death masks are usually made of wax or in white plaster, and the finished masks are usually mounted on white plaster. but this mask we were told is in black. Now, black masks are not entirely, they are rare, but they are not entirely uncommon. Because there is one of Sir Isaac Newton in his childhood home, and it's a black mask in pewter. Well, unlike Newton, both of Ram Mohan's masks are made of plaster, but there are subtle differences. The new mask is not quite black, it is a dark grey colour, black grey colour, and its origins are much more recent as well, because when it is turned over, you see that the plaster has not quite discoloured, while in the original mask there is a distinct yellow patina inside in the plaster. The head in the original mask looks down, the eyes look down, the countenance looks down, while in the black mask, which is the newer one, the head looks up, the chin is up. Now, why was this black mask commissioned? Who by and when? These are some of the questions that we do not have any satisfactory answers to as of yet. But the fact that it was commissioned, and recently, goes to show that there is a continued interest and a sustained interest in the life and works of Ram Mohan Roy.
Both masks now belong to the Edinburgh-based William Ramsay Henderson Trust. Today, while the scientific accuracy of the phrenological study is open to question, its value lies elsewhere, in the sincerity of the analyst and the significance attached by him to the subject of his analysis, a foreign-born man who had become so relevant to contemporary scientific, philosophical, and most importantly, social debate in Britain. Across the Atlantic, his name was equally revered. In an 8-page published address to members of the Congress on the abolition of slavery in 1833, an anonymous appellant ended thus.
In closing this address, allow me to assume the name of one of the most enlightened and benevolent of the human race now living, though not a white man, Ram Mohan Roy.
The keepsakes of Ram Mohan's hair and the care taken to preserve his death mask remain a testament to the esteem in which his peers in the city of Bristol held him, and also of his significance, not only as a Hindu reformer for his people in India, but as a symbol of the British and American struggle against slavery and racial prejudice, in which the city of Bristol played such an important part.